Good evening. Thank you for tuning in to the Injustice Anywhere radio program. My name is Bruce Fisher. I'm the Executive Director of Injustice Anywhere. We are an all-volunteer organization working to correct wrongful convictions. We have now developed a network of websites all working to bring more attention to wrongful convictions. You can view our main website at injustice-anywhere.org. You can also Google Injustice Anywhere, and you can see our main website right there at the top of the page. We currently have 8 featured cases. Those cases are detailed on our homepage. When visiting, you will find links to Facebook and Twitter. Please like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter in order to keep up to date with current events. Tonight's show will focus on the Charles Erickson case. Charles Erickson and Ryan Ferguson were wrongfully convicted in 2005 for the 2001 murder of Columbia Daily Tribune sports editor Kent Heitholt in Missouri. There were no witnesses, no physical evidence, no DNA, no motive, in fact, nothing at all tying either of them to the crime. Their convictions were secured based on a false confession from Charles Erickson and false eyewitness testimony. Thankfully, Ryan Ferguson was finally freed on November 12, 2013, after serving nearly 10 years in prison. Charles Erickson remains wrongfully convicted for that crime and is now currently serving a 25-year prison sentence. It is now blatantly obvious that Charles Erickson had absolutely nothing to do with the murder of Kent Heitholt. This case continues to highlight the terribly flawed Missouri justice system. Charles has a Facebook page for supporters called Free Charles Erickson. Most of his friends and family call him Charlie on the Facebook page, so I'm going to do so here tonight. Tonight we'll be talking with Charlie's attorney, Laura O'Sullivan, and Charlie's mother, Marianne Erickson. Attorney Laura O'Sullivan is a professor at the University of Missouri Kansas City School of Law, and she is also senior counsel with the Midwest Innocence Project. If you have any questions about tonight's show, feel free to call in during the live broadcast. The number for the show here is 347-850-1478. I would now like to introduce tonight's guests. Hi, Laura. Welcome to the show.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
Oh, very happy to have you. Hi, Marianne. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Bruce. Thanks for inviting me.
Sure. Glad to talk to you again. I know we've spoken once before. I'm really happy to have you here tonight.
Well, we're really grateful for your support and for that wonderful website that was recently completed and is so tremendous. Thank you again.
We're happy to do whatever we can to help. Now, Laura, I know you're an incredibly busy person, so I want to personally thank you for taking time to be here tonight.
Oh, I'm happy to spend some time talking about Charlie's case.
Now, to get started, can you tell our listeners a little bit about the Midwest Innocence Project?
Absolutely. The Midwest Innocence Project covers several states, including Missouri, Kansas, Iowa, Arkansas, and a few others. And basically what we do is we look into cases where people contact us and indicate that they were convicted but actually innocent. We get several hundred applications every year, and we wade through those cases and try and find some way to help the people that come to us. Basically what we're looking for is we're looking for people who are actually innocent, meaning they did not have any participation in the crime whatsoever. So we don't even take things like self-defense cases. We take cases where the people were not actually involved. And we investigate those cases and litigate those cases to try and hopefully get the person out of prison and exonerated.
You're doing very important work. How did you hear about Charlie's case? What got the organization started on this case?
Sure. We, in Missouri, Ryan Ferguson, Charlie's co-defendant, his case was being handled by a great attorney by the name of Kathleen Zellner and another attorney in her firm. And they were representing Ryan and contacted our project to do some general work on the case. We ended up filing what's called an amicus brief, or more understandably what's called sort of a friend of the court brief. and it's a brief that we file with the court that explains or summarizes a particular area of law. So in this case, we filed a brief to tell the court what we believed was the state of the law for innocence cases in Missouri and why we felt strongly that Ryan Ferguson's case fell within that application of the law. So we became involved in Ryan's case doing that. And then the other thing that we did was at University of Missouri, Kansas City, we hosted a panel discussion that was really sort of a unique approach. We invited the different attorneys that had represented Ryan throughout his litigation. So his trial attorney, an attorney that helped him with some of the appellate work, Kathleen, and her partner came, and then I participated, and Aaron Moriarty actually also came and participated in that panel discussion. So that was another way that we participated a little bit in that litigation. So that's sort of how we became familiar with, or more familiar, I guess I should say, with Ryan Ferguson and Charlie's case.
So you had a wide range of knowledge on the case before officially taking the case on Charlie's behalf.
Yes. In preparing the brief, I ended up reviewing a lot of the previous litigation, and so was familiar with it from all of the litigation that I reviewed, as well as, of course, the things that we had seen on the internet and on the 48 Hours episodes. So.
Now, I get asked this all the time because people are a little bit confused. We don't always follow the law and how the law works in the country. We just see that Ryan Ferguson was released. Everybody knows that they're both innocent that's followed this case. They can see that they're tied together. Either both of them committed the crime or neither one of them committed the crime. There's no possible way that Charles has anything to do with this crime. What is the current status of his case? Is the next step to file an appeal? If so, what's the expected time frame for filing an appeal?
Right. It sort of doesn't make any logical sense. Ryan's out. Why isn't Charlie out? And it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to anybody involved. But Charlie has actually not filed anything up until this date challenging his conviction at all. So this is the first time sort of post his plea that he's had attorneys looking at his case from the perspective of what can we do to right this wrong and help him get out. When you have a case where somebody is convicted that is innocent, there's a few different ways to try and get that person out. You have I think people are somewhat familiar with, like, going to the governor and asking the governor to release somebody. That's one way. But when we go into court, we have a couple of different things that we can file. We can file what's called a habeas corpus, which is a request that the court release him because they are unlawfully holding him. And so then we go through all of the legal claims to try and prove to the court that they should not be holding him. And in this case, what we would say is he's actually innocent, so he shouldn't be in prison. And here's what we can show to the court to prove those things. And here's what went wrong in that initial trial, and in his case, in the initial plea and the representation that he got in his interactions with the police and the prosecutors. That's one way. And then
because
another
10 years have gone by, is there any time restrictions on this, or can a habeas be filed at any time?
Well, sometimes there are time restrictions. So we might be asking the court to look at it outside of a time restriction. So sometimes in federal court there are time restrictions. Sometimes state courts have time restrictions. In this case, we would be asking the court to look at it under a Missouri rule, and that rule we can still file that. If we were in federal court, even if you're outside of the time frame, then you can ask the court to take a look at it based on what we call manifest injustice. So we say, I think people believe that it's unjust to hold an innocent person in prison, and so the law provides for exceptions or for the court to look at things even if they're outside of the time frame if you have the information at the court and you're able to plead the things that the court requires. So that's one way. And
there's certainly compelling information currently that the court would want to see in this case.
Right.
Because it is a case of actual innocence. Now, you were going to let us know about another possibility.
Right, and another way is to do what we call a motion to withdraw the guilty plea. So that's sort of unique to cases where the person has entered a plea of guilty, but there is an avenue where a person could ask the court to allow a person to withdraw their guilty plea.
How would that work?
Depending on what you file, that tells us, that informs us where we have to go. So if you file a motion to withdraw your plea, you would do that in the court where you pled. If you do a motion for what we call a petition for a writ of habeas corpus, you file that in the jurisdiction where he's being held. So that's in a different courthouse.
That makes perfect sense.
Or you can file that in the federal courts. So there's a lot of decisions and a lot of different things to consider.
Okay, and those considerations are still in the works. There's nothing final to publicly state regarding that, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, most of our listeners have followed this case for years now. Due to the media attention surrounding Ryan Ferguson, there were several TV specials, and the case received a great deal of attention. So the basic details are well known. For those that aren't up to date with the case, the full case summary is available at freecharleserickson.org. Just to give a few brief details tonight, a couple years after the Heitholt murder, Charlie read an article about the unsolved murder, and he feared that he resembled a composite sketch released by police. Charlie and his friends partied a little bit too hard that night on Halloween. It was a college town. There was a lot of partying going on that night. It left him with vague memories of the parties that he attended. When reading that article about the case a couple years later, knowing that he was at a bar nearby the scene of the crime caused him to worry that he might be involved. Charlie began talking to friends about his fears, which ended up landing him in an interrogation room, tried to answer questions about a murder that he had absolutely nothing to do with. Charlie was overwhelmed by his interrogators and ended up giving a false confession. Laura, can you give the listeners an idea of what would lead somebody in Charlie's position to give a false confession like he did to the Columbia detectives?
Yes. And, this is one area that I think, even I coming into this work, I don't even think I was aware of how prevalent this problem is. People confess for a variety of reasons when they did not have anything to do with the case. Just to give you some idea of how often this happens, last year of all of the exonerations, 17% of those people exonerated had pled guilty to the offense for which they were then proven innocent. In murder cases, 20% of all of the cases involve some form of false confession. So 20% of all homicide cases through the years where we've been able to prove people actually innocent involved a false confession. So that is pretty frequent. So what happens? I think it's lucky for us that the interrogation was videotaped because we can see it happen. You see the police officer get physically right in front of him. You see the threats. There are threats of the death penalty. He says things like, it's your head on the chopping block. You need to give this statement before he does in this other room. They imply that Ryan has given statements implicating Charlie, which was, of course, we know not true. So the police are allowed to lie to people in these circumstances, and then the other thing that you see is the police feeding him information that should never have been disclosed to him if he is in fact a suspect. So they did things like they told him in the interrogation how Mr. Heitholt had been, how many times he had been hit. They gave him details about where it happened. You see them drive him in the video clip over to the scene. All of this information clearly that he did not have in the room. So Why does this happen? This happens for a variety of reasons. Sometimes people falsely confess. We see it with young people. He was very young at the time that this happened. We see this with people who have mental health problems. We see this with people who have drug or alcohol problems. And what we know about this night is that Charlie was under the influence of a lot of alcohol and drugs. So we see a lot of these different factors for people occurring in this case, multiple factors.
He was an easy target for police when he came in for questioning, was he not?
He was an easy target, and they were desperate to close this case. This is a case that had been open for 2 years in a small college town with a popular, respected member of the community that had been, killed right around the corner from the police department. And, so they were under those pressures of trying to solve the case. Here comes this sort of easy target, and they got overzealous and went for it. And
they succeeded. I think that when this case is a little bit unique because he had pled guilty, because the videotape of this interrogation is so blatant. The misconduct to me, in my personal opinion, is plain to see. But the person that would normally argue that would be Charles Erickson. And because it was a unique case, it would have been his defense to say that he was forced into confessing. I think it was very difficult for Ryan Ferguson's defense team to make that argument. Does that seem logical?
Right, and it does, and the Ferguson team did try to show that at the trial. But normally when you have a false confession like this, the person who is, challenging that confession would be the attorney for Charles. And, and so, but because of a variety of things, he came in and he pled guilty to a agreed-upon sentence. At that point, what he knows is I'm not going to get the death penalty, right? This is the term of years you're going to get, and he was led to believe that there was evidence and witnesses out there that he was unaware had actually recanted and changed their testimony.
Right. Like you said, the police have the right to lie to the person they're questioning, and they told Charlie that there was another witness that claimed to see him near the scene of the crime that night, which we all know now is completely false. And he was told that Ryan was going to place the blame on him, which was totally false. But he didn't know any of that sitting in that room as a young man, very young. 2 years out of high school.
No, and some of the information he didn't know when he stood in front of the court and pled guilty either. So there was, he was under the impression that there was additional evidence corroborating or supporting his involvement, and that's is absolutely not true. And he was not informed that witnesses had, in fact, recanted some of their testimony. So,
right. I know you're limited on what you can say because this is an ongoing case, and obviously you're the attorney representing Charlie. But Ryan was eventually freed based on Brady violations. Are you able to
Correct.
speak about that in any way? Can those violations work in Charlie's favor as well?
Well, what I can say is that those things that they did not disclose to Ryan, they did not disclose to Charles either. So,
right.
So, they didn't disclose them to anyone. So, when the investigator comes and testifies at the hearings and confirms that these witnesses, either that he had interviewed witnesses with the important information for the defense and had not disclosed those, those were not only not disclosed to Ryan, those were also not disclosed to Charles.
The recent lawsuit that was filed by Ryan's attorneys, to me, it lays out this case incredibly well. We have a link to it on freecharleserickson.org. It really is an amazing case, and I encourage all of our listeners to really dig in and learn about this case because it highlights so many things that should never happen in our justice system. Now, I'd like to have Marianne come on, and I follow the Free Charles Erickson Facebook page. I've been very impressed with some of the updates regarding Charlie's studies and his outlook for the future. And Marianne, I know you have a lot on your plate. I know you're keeping track with a lot of things right now, so I want to thank you for being on tonight to talk about Charlie.
Oh, well, it is my pleasure, and he is doing the best that he can in his situation, and he's very grateful for the people that pay attention to the updates on the Facebook page, and to you for again, developing that wonderful free charleserickson.org website that is all inclusive and has the video and all the important case information. He is very busy. He's a very busy prisoner and works hard on all of his activities, whether it's his studies or his physical fitness or his teaching. And he's now just finishing up facilitating a impact of crime on victims course and is preparing to facilitate, and that's in his wing, he's preparing to facilitate a course on impact of criminal thinking with the same group of students or I guess you would call them wingmates who need to study these courses and pass them in order to proceed toward parole.
Now, you had recently mentioned on the Facebook page that one of his fellow inmates had a difficult time, and he actually came to his aid to console him. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Oh, his cellmate, Robert's father, had passed. Is this the situation that we're talking about?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and Robert got a lot of wonderful comments and sympathetic, caring wishes from people on the Facebook page. We printed them out and sent them to Robert, and he and Charlie got a special meal prepared in their cell that would have been the type of meal that the father, Robert's father, would have enjoyed very much. And so in that way, they honored him, and Charlie was there and able to give him support. And unfortunately, Robert was able to talk with his mother on the phone, but she was not able to be with him, and he was not able to attend the services. But there was, a remembrance at the prison, and they did spend some significant time together talking about how much he loved his father and about the fun things and the good memories.
I just thought it was a wonderful story. Guilty or innocent, while serving time in prison, losing a loved one while you're incarcerated is a very difficult time because you can't have personal contact with your family. And just to hear how Charlie reacted to that and worked to help his cellmate, I thought was just a wonderful story. I thought it told a lot about Charlie's character as well.
He is very considerate and concerned about the human condition, and I think I have always been very proud of him for that, and I think he will always be that way. It's just his nature. He is, of course, very concerned about taking good care of himself, and he knows that there are a lot of people in the facility that have disabilities and they have difficulties, and many of them have no visits. And he tries very hard to know, what they are experiencing and to understand the bitterness or the disappointment that so many feel when there are no visits. And people have said to me, how can he smile as he does in some of the pictures from the visits that we put on Facebook? And he smiles because the visits are they are refreshing, they are renewing, and they are fun. And we get to play games and we eat snack foods together, and twice a year we're able to bring a special meal that he designs and we prepare, and so we make the most out of the visits, and he knows that he is in the minority because most of the residents don't get any visits, and he feels the same way about being able to take college courses. There are very few of the offenders there who have the financial support from the outside, from family or friends or another third party to tuition to take a college course and be challenged. And he is very grateful for that, and I'm sure that one of the reasons, but not the only reason, that he works so hard on his studies.
Now, how often are you able to visit?
We like to go twice a month. We'd like to go more often, but the trip is 3 hours each way, and my husband and I both work full time, so we're not able to go every weekend. It would be nice if we could, but
you are able to see him a couple times a month.
We are, and we talk to him on the phone nearly every day, and that's a wonderful thing, because we keep up with each other's activities and challenges, and communicate about needs and successes.
Sure, having contact with him is great, and the reality is that many of the people that Charlie's in prison with are guilty, and Charlie is going to get more attention and more sympathy because anybody that reads this case, anything knows anybody about this case, knows that he's innocent. So it's one of those things. Is there ever any jealousy that he has to endure while dealing with other inmates, or is that something that has pretty much been non-existent?
I would have to ask him if he has detected that. I don't know. I think it would be a natural thing. It would be expected, but whether it's been stated, I cannot predict that. It's a good question.
I'm happy to hear that he hasn't mentioned it. A couple of our other cases, it has come up, and it's just one more thing that he would have to deal with, so it's nice to hear that he hasn't mentioned it. Now, we were talking previously with Laura about the interrogation, and Charlie comes from a family that has a history in law enforcement. Is that correct?
Yes, he does, Bruce. And are you in the Chicago area?
I am. We live about 45 minutes outside of Chicago.
Well,
but I grew up really close to the city.
Okay. Well, you're familiar with the Chicago police force, and
absolutely,
and the size of it and the complexity of it. My grandfather, Charlie's great-grandfather, was a juvenile officer, and then my father was in the Chicago Police Department, and then my father was a juvenile officer and a detective, and later worked in internal affairs for the police department. And my uncle, who was my father's brother, was a commander in the inner city, commander of one of the precincts, and he was also a detective. And my brother is a retired police officer from the Northbrook Police Department. And then his sister-in-law is a lieutenant in the Chicago Police Department. So Charlie has grown up knowing many, many police officers and loved them and respected them and I think looked up to them.
How do you feel that affected him while he was being questioned by the police?
I expect that his trust went beyond his family members who were police officers. I can't say for sure, but it would be very understandable that he would generalize about the positive characteristics of the police officers who were his family members. and to think that perhaps all or most police officers were like that.
It would be a normal way to think. We have family that is also in law enforcement, and I generally have great respect for everyone that's in law enforcement, and I think a great majority are dedicated to their job and doing it properly. You do have isolated cases where there's misconduct and where officers are not doing their job correctly. That's certainly what we saw here. And unfortunately, it was a little bit more of a groupthink mentality because quite a few ended up getting into the mix. And I just feel that in the situation Charlie was in, the confusion he had, the family history would have played a large role in how he accepted everything the police were telling him. They told him that another witness saw him by the scene of the crime. They told him that Ryan was implicating him. Why would he have any reason to believe that they were lying to him at that time?
I'm sure you were right. It doesn't seem like it would make sense for him to distrust them.
And Bruce, if I could jump in here just a second.
Sure, absolutely.
You know, it's interesting to me because when people see that and when they consistently turn and look at me and say, can they do that? Can police officers do that? And I don't know that the general public knows that police officers do this as a tactic in their interrogations. And it's surprising to people, and I think it sort of feels wrong when you hear these police officers, you know, not being truthful and honest with the person that they're questioning.
Right. I think many people don't know that this occurs. I think that more needs to be done to inform the public how these things work. And I really do believe that we need to reform the system when it comes to how we interrogate possible suspects, because this one, it's a little bit of a unique situation. I know we talked about it already, because my number one thing would be we need to videotape every interrogation. This one was videotaped. But many other cases, they're not. And if they were, that would solve the problem. This one's a little bit more of a unique case, so it doesn't really support that argument. But just the fact that they could outright lie while questioning a suspect, especially a vulnerable suspect that's young and has a trust in the police and is confused and scared, really common sense tells you that we need to change how that works. But that's, my opinion. I'm certainly not an expert in it, but I would think that many people would want to look into that situation and try to make it better.
And Bruce, this is Marianne again. I think that it bears the importance of parents teaching their teens early to be quiet and request an attorney, say nothing, just say nothing.
Say nothing and request an attorney. You really can't get better advice if you ask me. Now,
right.
Charlie expressed his feelings about Ryan Ferguson's release in a couple of interviews, and I believe he mentioned it in his letter to his supporters. On a personal note, as his mother, how was he emotionally when he saw Ryan finally released? Did he feel that a weight had been lifted off of him?
Bruce, I'm sure he did. He didn't say that he did to me, but I think that the breadth of his smile increased, and both in person and in pictures. And I think Erin Moriarty said during the recent 48 Hours taping, and I think it was aired on the 29th of March, that she thought that he appeared to have had weight lifted from him and that he seemed to be almost a new person. So I know that he is focused on his freedom, and he's focused on his studies, and he's focused on doing the best job he can, taking care of himself, and now he can singularly focus on that, on himself.
How has incarceration affected Charlie over the past 10 years? I know it has to be difficult on him, but how do you think it affected his outlook on life from the time he was first incarcerated up until today?
Boy, that's hard to say. A person over 10 years, normally, whether they're incarcerated or out in the world, changes so much over 10 years. I think
absolutely,
that
especially those years, going from 19 to 30, the 20s. But we change an awful lot in our 20s.
Yes, and I think he has matured. Tremendously in those 10 years. He's learned more about what he really is interested in. he knows, he has seen that, or he has experienced that young people are often not the best students, and that it is maybe true that education is sometimes wasted on the young, and now he's anxious to catch up.
Now, from a mother's perspective, there's nobody that knew him better than you did as a child. Tell us a little bit about what Charlie was like as a child growing up.
Well, he was a delight. He was, he was always very sharp and curious, interested, worked hard at play and at school and sports. He, was independent, and he had a great imagination. I remember when he was, I think, probably about 5 or 6, he went to the kitchen and he got some garlic powder and some wooden stakes he'd seen a movie on vampires, and some wooden stakes from the garage, and put them in a backpack, and we asked, well, where are you going? He says, well, I'm hunting vampires. And so he was, a very creative thinker, even at a young age. But I don't think he ever did find any vampires. But he participated in a variety of different sports, starting with soccer and ending up in football in the 9th grade at the West Junior High. West Junior High at that time had grades 7, 8, and 9, and then the senior high school was 10, 11, 12. But he was not a big guy, and so he didn't get off the bench much, and I think that disappointed him. So he did get involved in strength training and more aerobic exercise that was more personal after that. And I think that he has really made the most of that early training and is in the best shape of his life right now. But back to early life, he was a Cub Scout and a Boy Scout, and played the viola. He had the opportunity to start taking viola and in elementary school as part of a class, and played in the orchestra, and then sang in the choir, and often played at church and sang at church. So he was a quite well-rounded young man, I would say, and we always thought that he would have a tremendous future, and we still think that he can have a tremendous future. We just need to get him out of there.
Now, you had provided 2 really good pictures of Charlie, one in a football uniform and one when he's playing the viola. They are on freecharleserickson.org. I recommend everybody go take a look at that on the Who is Charles page, because you had given me some information about him, too, and we provided it there. He was a very active child. He was involved in a lot of group activities and was very social.
Oh, yes, very, very social. He was enamored with with girls, and just would fall in love, from afar, and when meeting new classmates at the beginning of a school year. And he always loved to give girls flowers, and it was just like the really most important thing you could ever do to get a girl's attention. And but he also likes to give me flowers, and I'll always remember I was at work one day when he had been arrested, and he had been in jail for about 8 weeks, and Mother's Day was coming up, and suddenly walking into my workplace was a volunteer pastoral counselor from the jail, and she had 24 yellow roses. And he had convinced her that it was really, really important that she considered doing this for him. And she did. And I was overwhelmed. And he just knew that this was going to be a really hard Mother's Day for me, because he was in jail. It was such a bad situation. And then he was thinking, my mom really needs flowers. And so that's just another example of, I think, his kindness and his empathy and his consideration.
Thank you for sharing that, because at that time in his life, he was going through something that was quite overwhelming, And to think that he still stopped and thought, I have to get my mom flowers, it really still, even in that darkest moment of his, it still showed how caring he was and where, his thoughts were in the right place. So thanks for sharing that story. I had not heard that before. At the time of his arrest, he was working and attending college, a local college at the time, right?
Yes, he was. He was taking psychology and, a computer course, and I forget what the other courses were that he was taking at that time. And he was working at a laundromat and living at home, and he was driving our oldest car, and just taking care of life and getting good grades. And we thought he was on. Actually, about a week before he was arrested, he was planning to go skiing with a friend in Colorado, and he had saved money and bought some ski pants, and they were going. That was over spring break.
In those years, he was experimenting a little bit too much with drugs and alcohol. I know a lot of people at that age, that's the time where you party a little bit more than you should. But he was still in school, and he was still working, and he was still moving forward with his life. It wasn't a time of turmoil by any means.
No, it was not. Charlie was very sneaky, and his sneakiness got him into trouble in more than one instant. And so his experimentation was covered up by sneakiness. And
many kids at that age, that's what gets them by. That's what our kids try to pull things on us all the time, and I know they get away with some of it. We can't stop it all. And we were all teenagers at one time too.
That's right. It's a matter of making a choice how you are going to use your intellect. And people that have good perception and good intellectual skills have the ability to be sneakier than other folks. And he was pretty sneaky, I have to tell you, as a teenager.
And his intelligence helps play a role in all that.
If I could jump in here, if I could jump in here a little bit, I think that some of those, some of when somebody is abusing alcohol and drugs, they attempt to cover it up. And so, he, I think, like so many other people who use alcohol and drugs and find themselves in situations where they have, used too much, are going to do things to try and cover it up. And so I think that some of the things that were going on behind the scenes were he was trying to cover up some of the overuse of alcohol and drugs during that time period.
Absolutely.
The other thing, real quick, is, it is sort of interesting. I think people have this perception because it's so scary to think that this could happen to anybody. But it could happen to anyone. It can happen to young people. It can happen to old people. It can happen to business people. It can happen to former police officers. I mean, what we see in these cases is how innocent people can be wrongfully convicted, and these innocent people that are wrongfully convicted come from every walk of life, from every background. So, there he is showing up for classes, and all of a sudden there the police are, and he's going down to the police station, and his life is changed forever.
Absolutely. Those are excellent points, and all of us have our flaws. Nobody's perfect. And when you go in for this questioning, they're going to pick you apart. And in every innocent person that goes in there, they're going to find little flaws that they can use against you.
Right.
And unfortunately, like you said, this could happen to anybody. And if you follow anybody that follows our organization, Injustice Anywhere, we stress that all the time, that don't ignore this problem, because one day it might be you, and you're going to be very shocked when it happens, because that's the reality of it. It can happen.
Right.
So thank you for bringing that up. It's an important point to make, especially in Charlie's case. The police are well trained in what they're doing, and I just saw in that video Charlie was absolutely overwhelmed by what he was up against, and he was no match for the police that were questioning him.
No, and they were doing all sorts of things that they shouldn't have been doing. For example, they kept out of the public some specific information that they were supposed to get from the person who actually committed this crime. Well, of course they can't get that from Charlie because he didn't do it. So then they're disclosing this information on the videotape. And so there was also, I mean, these cases are sort of perfect storm type of cases where multiple things go wrong, and when all of these things go wrong, you end up with somebody who's innocent in prison. And his case has so many of those things that went wrong.
I hope in the future the police department corrects their wrong here. The first priority is to free Charles Erickson. The second priority for me, and it's a topic for another show, is this case needs to be reopened because whoever killed Kent Heitholt is still free. There's a murderer on the loose in this case, and I have a feeling that it's going to take Charles, being released before that happens. But like I said, that's for another show. That's another topic. I want to discuss more about Charlie's studies because he was in college when he was arrested, and then after being in prison, he continued on with his studies. And Marianne, you have posted up some really promising updates about his grades that he gets on his papers, and it really shows me how dedicated he is to his work. Can you tell us a little bit about some of those recent papers?
Oh, sure. Currently, he is studying an advanced U.S. history course from Louisiana State University, and the topic is the American Revolution and the framing of the Constitution, Declaration of Independence, and it started colonists, and then and with looking at the relationship with England, he typically gets A+ on his papers. This particular course involves 18 lessons with 2 or 3 papers per lesson, and there's no midterm, but there is a final exam, which is heavily weighted for his final grade. And this is his 4th course from Louisiana State University. Last semester he took 2, one in psychology and one advanced sociology course, common social problems, and he got A's in both of those courses. And prior to that, he took the United States history course studying colonial America and also got an A in that. And that was the same format as the current U.S. history course. He took the only 2 courses that were available on paper from the University of Missouri before starting courses from LSU. It's very rare now for even state universities that are large and have a lot of resources to provide for offenders and other people that don't have access to the Internet paper correspondence courses any longer. The Ohio University in Athens does currently, however, and so he's looking at some courses also at Ohio University, and he helped one of his housing mates to apply for and get accepted to take an Ohio University course in environmental science. And he has begun that, but there's been a problem for this man to get his textbook because, for some reason, because it's a hardback book, folks are saying he can't have that in the building. And so Charlie's been trying to advocate with him to get the book that he needs for his course. But he learned about these courses through the speech and debate club called the Gavel Club, which is the institutional version of Toastmasters. And he actually convinced himself to, study college courses because he got assigned on the side of the debate to argue for the reinstitution or the restitution of Pell Grants for offenders so that they could earn college credits while incarcerated. And he learned that a college degree really does help a former inmate on release to have a better life and earn more money, and that even if he or she has felony offenses, that a college degree is valuable for people that have been incarcerated. So, I think he intends when he is released to finish his education And I told him I'm really excited about that because I've always felt it was really important for him.
Well, keep up with the updates because I am very encouraged when I read them. It's very uplifting, and I'm very impressed. So please pass that on to Charlie that he's just doing an outstanding job with his work. And to hear these stories, multiple different stories of him trying to help others while he's in prison are very uplifting, too. It just shows that his mind is in the right place. Now, you've been doing a really wonderful job on the Free Charles Erickson Facebook page. I encourage all of our listeners to go visit and like the page and check back often for updates because Marianne is updating that page all the time. If you are able, please consider making a donation to Charlie's cause. You can find a PayPal button right there on the Free Charles Erickson Facebook page. Charlie really needs your help to raise money for the necessary items to help ensure his freedom. It's a long battle. It's an expensive struggle, and he needs your help. So if you can, if you're able, please help Charlie with his fund and his cause. Like I said, the PayPal button is right there on the Free Charles Erickson Facebook page. We do have a call, so I'd like to take that now. Let's see if we have a question. This is a 303 area code. You're on the air. Do you have a question for Laura or Marianne?
Hello. This is Charlie's Aunt Angela calling from Denver, Colorado.
Hello.
And I just wanted to say how much our family and Charlie appreciate your Bruce's
no
support. Angela's always been a very loving and caring aunt, and I know that she has been following the Facebook page very faithfully and has always been very concerned about Charlie and very supportive of efforts to free him.
Well, I just want to say that we appreciate everyone's efforts, and the Injustice Anywhere page that you created is really amazing. And I know that I'm talking to about Charlie and about his situation really would like to know more about whether through the legal system, if it's actually possible for him to be released and to possibly be released and eventually have these convictions overturned, or if release is the most we could expect.
Sounds like a question for Laura.
I think that's a question for me, and I believe very, very strongly in Charlie's case, and I believe we will be asking for his conviction to be overturned. And
that's fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely believe very strongly in his innocence and in the things that were not disclosed. The Court of Appeals has said that, you can't do that when they reviewed Ryan's case. And, if you can't do it for Ryan, you can't do it for Charlie either. The other thing is, Charlie has so much support, in addition, obviously, to, Marianne and his family. He also has the support of Ryan Ferguson, who, when he was released, in his press conference, hours after he's released, he talks about his support of Charlie, and his family has been very supportive, as has Kathleen Zellner and the attorneys in her firm, including Judge Johnson and everybody else. So there's a lot of people out there supporting these efforts, and so I feel very strongly that
Ryan's father is a great guy. We did a show with Ryan's dad before he was released, and I know Bill has commented a couple times on Charlie's page, and he's liked that page, and I know he supports Charlie 100%, so that family has been outstanding with their support.
Yeah, Bill, Leslie, Ryan they've just been amazing, and it's just so generous and graceful, frankly. It really is amazing.
Well, thank you, Laura, and thank you, Bruce, and looking forward to seeing Charlie in person hopefully soon in the next, 3 to 6 months. And in the meantime, I've gotten to talk to him on the telephone, which was wonderful, and, just keeping in touch through letters and phone calls. So we really appreciate everything you're doing, and I know the the legal system is very complex, and I don't understand all the steps that it would even require to accomplish what you're trying to do. So I really appreciate your expertise and your commitment to help him. So thank you all.
Thank you so much for the call.
You bet. Bye-bye.
We're coming up here to the end of the show. I want everybody to take a moment, anybody who's listening tonight, and go and read the Free Charles Erickson Facebook page, visit freecharleserickson.org, and learn about this case. Charles Erickson had absolutely nothing to do with the murder of Kent Heitholt, and he should be set free. No matter how you feel about anything else that's happened in this case, Charles Erickson is in prison today because he's convicted of murder, a murder he did not commit. When you know those facts, then regardless of how you feel about anything else in this case, you should know that he should be set free. So please learn about this case. Please take the time. And if you can, once again, please make a donation to Charlie's cause on the Facebook page. I'd like to thank both of you for being here tonight.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Bruce, again for inviting us. It's our pleasure.
Thank you. I also encourage everyone listening to support the Midwest Innocence Project. What Laura and her group are doing, it's very important work. There's a lot of time put in. It's all on a voluntary basis. They do this because they're passionate for it. They do it because they want to help innocent people that are wrongfully convicted. And it's a very special group of people that does that. So please support the Midwest Innocence Project. So thank you both for being on tonight. Have a good night.
Okay.
Thank you,
Bruce.
We'll see you on Facebook.
That would be great.
Next week, the Injustice Anywhere Spring newsletter will be available, and we will post links for that newsletter on all of our websites and on Facebook. So please look out for that. Please visit our main website, injustice-anywhere.org, to keep up to date with our future shows. We will have a show next week discussing the newsletter. Thank you again for tuning in. Good night.